My name is Chris Brandt, and snowmobiling is my passion. This wide-open podcast is here to share stories, tips, and tactics to make you a more successful backcountry rider. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another podcast. I'm here next to my good friend, Blaine. How are you doing, Blaine?
Pretty good this morning.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's like 2 podcasts in a row for you, dude.
I know. It's amazing.
Yeah.
At least I had a little more than 10 minutes to prepare for this one.
I like to keep you on your toes.
You never know around here.
Awesome. Well, let's just dive into it, guys. So we've done, I don't know how many videos like via YouTube and social and all of this over throughout the years with regards to shock setup and specifically Fox stuff. But we constantly keep getting asked a lot of the same questions, and things have changed since we've done the last video. So we thought we would do another one, especially as we're going into this year's season. Let's talk about all of the things Fox. And so what we're going to touch base on here is a lot of the questions that Blaine fields a ton over the phone here at BBA, comments, messages via YouTube and social and all of that. And so we're going to kind of just break that down. And one thing that that you can also do is, you know, maybe you're not running Fox shocks, but you've thought about it. Maybe some of this information will help you. And or if, you know, it's not in the budget and you just want to know more about setting up your sled suspension wise, whether you run the stock walkers or Fox, maybe this will help you as well. So, Blaine, I'll kind of, you know, we've talked about this in several podcasts on like our must-haves and all of that stuff. You've been running the Fox stuff for a couple years now, and you know, bring it back for the listeners at home, thinking about like, is it worth it? Should I do it? And what am I going to gain from it?
Well, I mean, like the first thought is like when you're modding a snowmobile, it's like, let's get more power out of this thing.
Yeah.
Let's go faster. Let's get the most out of it. And yeah, like a clutch kit would probably be above getting a set of full shocks. But I mean, it's amazing how much faster you can go over some of this terrain and absorb those bumps with better suspension, and you can just ride better and it reacts more predictable. I mean, it's a lot more fun to ride when you can actually handle the sled as opposed to slapping a turbo on a snowmobile and barely being able to hang on with, you know, the stock shocks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess those are all really good points. And I swear you were like reading my notes. But I'm going to go back. You said something at the end there, stock shocks. You know, let's just go back to 2019. 850 comes out. Axis chassis, narrow front end, and the shocks are, you know, the sleds are coming with a lot of monotube shocks, okay? This is where there was a giant difference of when upgrading to Fox, okay?
Definitely.
The manufacturers have done a great job at making the stock setup way better. And so, like, for example, on a Chaos, you've got the Velocity shock package from Walker that has high speed and low speed compression. And it's for an out of the box stock suspension setup, it's actually pretty dang good. Right?
Yeah, it's way better than the old monotubes for sure. And I just remembered, I had a little memory of, I think it was like 2018, 2019. I was in the Rabbit Ears parking lot with Eric Voke tuning a turbo, and happened to run into you, and you were doing some Fox tuning and suspension stuff, and you're like, yeah, dude, you just gave me a sled. You're like, go take this out on the trail and go see how it feels and come back. And
boy, if I would have only known now, or then what I know now.
Oh, for sure. So I took it down the trail, just held it to the bar, just smashing all these bumps and whoops. I was like, this is awesome. I was like, I better take this off the trail a little bit, and went and did some donuts in the snow. And you probably expected me to be gone 5-10 minutes. It was like 25 minutes later, you come up the trail, like, everything all right? I'm like, yep, everything's fine. But, I mean, that was one of the first experiences getting to ride Fox shocks, and it was just a world of difference. It was impressive.
Yeah. And kind of going back to the stock shocks being that much better, I love that's what competition is about, right? And so with the stock stuff getting better, we did a big revamp on our shock package just a couple years ago, doing the all new lightweight series, and then we took a dive into all the internal components, and just really took another big leap forward with the Fox package, and then also having 3 different packages for different levels of riders and or different needs out on the snow. So we've got a coil package, and we'll break all this down. We got a coil package, an air package, and then an electronic with adjustability on the handlebar, which is air also. So here's what I wanted to do for you guys, is I'll just break down real quick kind of features and benefits. So on the shocks, so what you're going to typically see, like on our air package, so probably our most popular package is the QS3 air package, that you're going to lose just under 4 pounds of unsprung weight on the sled over like your Chaos shocks. Okay, so that's a pretty significant number when you're talking about weight loss on the snowmobile.
And you're talking like stock Chaos shocks, like the velocity shocks.
Correct. Yep. And that's huge. I mean, that's like 4 pounds plus all the features and benefits of the adjustability on the Fox shocks and everything there. So, that was a big push from my side to Fox. Is, yes, I feel like ours handle really well, but I want another nugget out there in the weight department. You guys know I'm a weight conscious guy on my sled. And, one thing that's always funny, they're like, well, if I wanted to lose 4 pounds, I wouldn't eat cheeseburgers or something. I was like,
you should do that too.
You should do that too. But, and anytime someone says that, like, well, it'd be a lot easier if I just lost 20 pounds in the gym. But your snowmobile is still 4 pounds heavier, dude. Like, I cannot emphasize enough. Like, when, on my super lightweight sleds, we take almost 50 pounds off the snowmobile. And yes, it costs a tremendous amount of money, but after you ride one, and again, like, well, I should go to the gym and lose 50 pounds. Yeah, that would be awesome, but your snowmobile's still going to be 50 pounds heavier.
Yep.
It's a big difference, okay? All right, so back to features and benefits. So we've got 4 pounds lighter, up to 4 pounds lighter on the air package. All 3 packages have the quick and easy 1, 2, 3 adjustment on the clicker. And so this was something that we kind of stumbled on quite a few years ago because our shocks were too complicated. And even the Chaos shocks, the velocity shocks and the Pro shocks, like, so, with the velocity shocks having a high speed and low speed compression, I would say 90% of the people don't know the difference, and that might scare you, and then you don't adjust anything. And that's the whole reason that you have adjustable shocks. And so, that was our big push quite a few years ago of going to a very simple, soft, medium, firm on the ski shocks and front track shock, and then soft, medium, and our new feature, newish feature, it's been out for a few years now, but Lockout in that rear track shock. And so, the reason I hope that you're buying these shocks is so you use the features that are on it. And Blaine, you can talk about this because I yell at you all the time, and you're getting better about it. But of using the adjustability, because for one, we did our best to make it easy, and for 2, it makes a giant difference.
It does make a giant difference, and you have scolded me a few times. And I remember that early season about 2 years ago, we were going up that hill, and I think I was on a 55 Chaos, and I was just all over the place. And you're like, are you in Lockout? And I was like, lock who, what? I was like, oh yeah, I have this sweet feature that I rarely use.
And that was the first year that you were running Fox on your personal sled.
Yep. So, put that into Lockout, and I just tiptoed right up to the top, no problem. Just made it so much easier. But I love the adjustability, being able to do 1, 2, or 3, depending on if you're riding on the trail ride in at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. When you're super fatigued, you want those shocks to take up every little bump you can. And it's nice to be able to just hop off your sled real quick, twist the dial, and get it to where you want it.
What I want you guys to note on that conversation right there is Blaine said, I scolded him and I asked, are you in lockout? The reason I asked if he was in lockout is because as I'm watching him climb this hill, I'm like, there's no way he's in lockout, and he should be because of the steepness of the hill, the softness of the snow being early season, and he's on a 155. Like, I'm like, he's going nowhere. And I know from all the years I've been riding these shocks, like if you're in lockout, it's going to keep the front end down. It's going to allow you to go forward. And so like, I already knew the answer because of how your sled was acting. So, the way I said it, dude, are you in lockout? Oh, right? Like,
yeah.
I should have said, hey, get off your sled, turn to the knob, and like get up here.
Well, it was probably the third time I tried that hill. You're like, all right, enough's enough. Like, there's a fix for this.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got the adjustability that we've again worked hard to try to make it super simple. We always ask people or tell people, don't be scared to try it, right? It's not like you're going to get lost in, this happens on my dirt bike all the time. There's 23 clicks of adjustment on compression and rebound. And I mean, I have to make notes and like try to remember where I am. This isn't like that. Like go do a line and try it on 1. And then go do that same line and try it on 3. And like, oh, wow. Okay, I see how that worked. I can see how this would help me in certain scenarios. And then you can always go back to whatever. And so, again, it's super easy. On the coil shocks, there is compression, the 1, 2, 3 compression adjust on the ski shocks, front track shock, and rear track shock. There is no rebound adjust. There is rebound adjust on the QS3 air package. And then we haven't talked about it much yet, but a lot of you guys have experienced now and can never go back, much like me, the IQs electronic shock package. And so there's two main differences between the standard QS3 air package and the IQS package. One, obviously, being that it's electronic, so there's a switch up on the handlebar that allows you to control the clickers essentially by the touch of a button instead of having to get off of your snowmobile. And then also, there is no rebound adjust on the IQS. I'm not very good at explaining this. The Fox guys would have to, but the way they were able to do the valving and the adjustability, they basically have the rebound set to where it adjusts with the compression somehow. That's way over my pay grade and above my head, but I just know like when I hit the button, it still does what I want it to do. The beauty of IQS, and Blaine, I know you and we had a conversation last year when I let you ride my sled for a little bit I'm like, hey, just remember, don't forget to use the IQS, right? And, here's what happens is, yes, it's awesome that you have the QS3 switch on the coils and the QS3 package. And you should be getting off of your snowmobile, take those few seconds, click it to whatever, go do your line and win the line. The beauty of IQS is there is no getting off your snowmobile, and you can literally do it as you're riding on the fly. And so I find myself adjusting the suspension like seriously 75 to 100 times a day because it's that easy versus, 10 times a day. And
Yep.
So give me your feedback and your experience with it last year.
Well, I mean, with the IQS, you can, like you said, you can do it on the fly. So a lot of the times we're going up some lines and some trees, and the next thing you know, you're hitting a steep section or trying to side hill out of something, and you're like, I need to keep these skis down because I need to get up because you didn't expect to hit this spot or whatever. You can just hit that lockout, get to the top of that section, and then without even looking, you can hit, 1 or 2 to soften them back up. You can, keep going up the line, or you can turn back down. Where if you don't have the IQS, to go back down, you got to stop, get off your sled, turn it back to 1 or 2. And then go back down. Yep. And with that IQS, it's just right there on the fly. And, I mean, it just makes a world of difference in those situations. You're like, oh, shit, I'm not going to make this. You can hit that lockout, and you can get a little bit further or even get to the top.
Yeah, and the IQS has gone through many improvements over the years. The first year we came out with it was in 2019 or 20, somewhere right around there. And a lot of people were skeptical of wires going into the rear suspension and how our electronic components going to work out in the snow and the ice. And so over the years, it's actually been pretty good, but we've learned a lot. And I would say our current kit is about as good as it gets. Last season, we made a big change on the rear track shock to change the routing of the rear harness. With a proper install, the previous version was flawless. But with an improper install, what we found was that rear wire, as the shock was going through the travel, if it was zip tied too tight or something like that, it could pull a wire out of the plug. And so what Fox did is, so they changed on the rear track shock, they changed where the harness plugged in. Instead of being at the top, having to go through all of that shock travel, they put the plug on the bottom of the shock where the shock just moves very little and the wire is shorter, and it's essentially eliminated any and all issues with the wire side of things. I know, again, fielding calls a lot. That's probably been one of the biggest ones over the years, but it's been pretty nice to not have to deal with that anymore with the new setup.
Yeah, and if anybody does have any questions about that stuff, feel free to call us at the shop, because I can't tell you how many people I've sent emails with pictures of your sleds of routing, whether it be like a carbon skid that's a little bit different, or just somebody like, hey, where does this wire go, or how does this get routed? Like, we're happy to help there for sure.
Yeah, and so that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of, the features and benefits of the shocks. So lighter, easier to adjust, on the function side of things. And we've touched base a little bit of the performance on the snow, but that's what I wanted to dive into next. And then I'm going to get into a breakdown of how to set these up and how to tune them, because I think that's probably the biggest. A lot of questions, a lot of misconceptions, and a lot of hesitation comes from I'm nervous of how to install, how to set them up, how to tune them. I want to just ride my snowmobile. And I think what happens a lot is people just overthink it, because, to be honest, and it's not just because I've been working with Fox for 20 years, it's a very simple process, and we've taken a lot of steps to take a lot of the guesswork out of it, like with our rider setup sheet, install videos, just all of that. So let's talk about, just real quick to wrap up, features and benefits of what you're going to actually see the difference wise over stock. I don't want to fill your head with my ideas. I'm gonna ask you to tell the viewers, if you had one or two things that you could just pinpoint of. You've ridden stock sleds a bunch. We have, you jump on a fleet sled that has stock shocks. What is the biggest benefit or gain that you feel when you get on your personal sled that has shocks?
It's the predictability. Like being able to hit bumps and not, either if you're side hilling and you hit something, you don't bottom out. It's way more predictable, and it's just easier on the body. So you have less fatigue at the end of the day, and you can keep riding longer.
Cool. I'm going to have to start hiding my notes here, because so my two are, and my number one, and this is what I think is, there's two major benefits. One is the ease of the adjustability, because my biggest thing is we ride, last year I rode on Halloween, and I got my snowmobile out first day on Halloween, and I put my snowmobile away June 6th. Okay. So in that, how many ever months that is, a lot, I rode a ton of different conditions, a ton of different elevations, elements, everything. And to ask your sled suspension to be set in one setting for conditions in early season, late season, family ride, technical ride with the boys, you're compromising your sled setup all the time. And so that's what I enjoy the most is, and I'll give you guys an example, okay? So one of the ways we talk about how to think about adjusting your snowmobile is it makes sense, like 1 is soft, 3 is stiff, okay? Soft and stiff. You can think of it that way. But another way to break this down that might make even more sense for you is fast and slow, okay? So like, for example, on a super deep day, you notice your sled acts really fast because the snow is divey and it's burying down, and the sled is very fast, versus a day when the snow is set up. It's like, oh my gosh, I can barely get this thing on edge. And so it's very slow to react, okay? So the way we can adjust our suspension accordingly is, so let's go back to that deep powder day when it's super deep and very fast to react. What I will do is I will stiffen my suspension to slow the sled down. So like if we jumped on a sled back here in the shop and I had all the shocks on one, and you just sit in there and do the showroom thing of just like bouncing the sled left to right, you're going to notice on soft, the sled is really quick to react. Okay.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And then vice versa, if I stiffen it up, and we do this all the time, like at trade shows and stuff. Oh, wow, okay, yeah, I see the difference. It slows it down. So I wanted to give you guys that analogy to break it down. Like when you're riding the deep day and you're struggle busting because it's so deep and your eyes are down and all of that stuff, you can make just a very slight and quick adjustment on your sled to help slow that chassis down and make it more predictable, like you're saying.
Are there certain settings that you use more often, say just like in the non-electronic, like the QS3? Like, is there, like, are you normally in a 1, 2, 3 in the front or the rear, or like what's your setup there?
Yeah, so and that's a very common question we get, and I will say it's very dependent on the snow conditions, but let's just use the average snow condition. The average snow condition in January, February, and March is what we hope is a decent base with that 12 to 14 inches of soft snow on top, right? A very predictable snowpack. So what I run, whether it's, and it's different for coil package, air package, air and IQS are very similar in my opinion, but on a coil setup, the coil shocks are initially just softer, okay? So I will run like the ski shocks on 2. I run on all shock packages the front track shock on 1. I have the front track shock as soft as possible on all my sleds because I want that front track shock to collapse, allowing the sled to crawl up on top of the snow. Now, if you want to be like a Kosterky follower and just like do wheelies and hopovers and all that stuff, I would run your front track shock on 3, right? The stiffer it is, the more it's going to trench or lift the skis. And so, you know, you can purposely make your sled do that. I don't want to do that. I like going up to the top. However, I don't know how he does it. He goes up to the top still while doing all that stuff.
Yeah, he's impressive to watch.
He's awesome.
He's crushing it.
So coil, I run my skis generally on 2, my front track shock on 1, and I really like my sled being light in the front end. So I will run mostly on 1 in that rear track shock, and then when I know I want to go get stuff done in the steeper terrain, I'll go to 2 or 3. That's how I run a coil package. On the air, I have a completely different setup there. I run 1 on everything almost all the time because on 1, so again, what does that mean? That means my sled reacts very quickly, which also means the sled is easier to ride. It's easier to ride as long as I'm not tired and looking down. If I'm tired and looking down, then it's over. The sled is riding me and I'm not riding it. So, and that's the beauty of the air package is, and we'll break this down too when we talk about how to set up your sled. But the beauty of the air package is, and people get scared about adjusting the air, and there's two chambers that you have to air up, and oh my gosh, what I do. Here's how to simplify it. Air is just the spring. Like air is the spring on a coil shock, okay? But instead of this heavy metal spring, we have this light air, all right? And yes, we do have 2 chambers, but the reason that we have 2 chambers on the air shock is because we are able, so there's a main chamber that controls the ride height and the initial travel of the shock, and then what's called the EVOL chamber, which is a very small air pressure chamber, which is as you go further in the stroke of the shock, basically what's happening is you're going through that main chamber and it's transferring over into the EVOL chamber, which is smaller, so it increases the spring rate. So the beauty, and what that is called in like a spring shock term would be a dual rate spring, where you have a little helper spring on the bottom and then a big spring on the top. And so the benefit of that is we can be really nice and soft and supple with the big chamber or the big spring. And so the sled is very plush on the trail. It roll turns and gets up on edge very easy. But then as it goes through the stroke or the travel of the shock, it progressively gets stiffer. So this ramp I'm using here as an analogy is it's soft, 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 stiff, 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 and it gets stiff quicker at the end versus a more linear on a spring, because it's one spring rate, right? So it's a linear curve versus a more steeper curve.
That makes sense. So you have more stroke of the shock that's more plush until you get to however far through, and then it gets really stiff.
So the reason that you used that word predictability and why I run air shocks over coil shocks for me personally is because when we are going across that nasty side hill with ruts and logs and all of that, the air shock, in my opinion, is more predictable for that exact reason. Right? It's nice and soft and supple to keep me up on edge, but when I hit something, it's still firm and predictable and doesn't want to bounce me away and or bottom out the shock and have this big suspension moment.
Yeah, you get that reverb back through your hands, and just those are painful.
Yep. So I hope this helps, guys. You know, what we're trying to do is just break this down and make it more simple. So that is kind of that hopefully explained some of the differences between like a coil package and the air package. And just remember, QS3 and IQS are very similar in how we tune it and how it's adjusted, just the difference of having the controller on the handlebar, okay? And I guess let me break that down real quick too. So the IQS system, which is really cool because like on the standard Air QS3 package that's not electronic, you could do your clickers whatever way. You could have your front ski shocks on 2 or 3, your front track shock on 1, and your rear on 1, 2, or 3. So you have a little bit more adjustability that way. But so what we've done is there's 4 adjustments on the electronic IQS package. So on your controller you have soft, medium, firm, and then you can press and hold the button, and that goes into lockout. And in lockout, what we did there is we made the front ski. So sorry, back up. Soft, all 4 shocks are on 1. Medium, all 4 shocks are on 2. Firm, all 4 shocks are on 3. That makes a lot of sense. In the lockout mode, when you press and hold lockout, it puts your ski shocks in 2. It puts your front track shock in 1. And it puts your rear shock in lockout. That's, and that's where, like, for me, when I got to go get it done, that mode of having my ski shocks in 2, so it slows the chassis down a little bit, my front track shock on 1 to get on top of the snow, and, the rear shock in lockout to go forward. I'm telling you, dude, it's like, and that's something that you cannot do with stock shocks.
No.
You can't do that, right? You can't like change the spring rate, or you can't change the compression like in a timely manner in all your shocks. And that's the beauty of all of the setup.
It'd be nice to see if I know Polaris came out with something on the ride command in a trail sled.
Yeah.
So that's pretty innovative and pretty crazy, and
I'm sure they're working on it. The dynamics side on the trail side is really cool. It's only a matter of time before that will be out for mountain stuff. I'm sure.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, we're that's what we are doing, right? We are doing it here, and it's really cool. And it's funny. I posted a video or picture of me stuck the other day from last year, and the comments, I'm like, oh wow, you get stuck, and I'm like, yeah, I mean I do get stuck, and I do, but the amount of lines that I do make, there is definitely some talent involved there, but there's 100% like there's some stuff sled setup wise that allow me to win the line or make mistakes and not get stuck and be able to get out of it and or it's more forgiving, right? And so like I don't know, man. I love having every advantage I can get out in the backcountry.
Yeah, but you are still human.
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah, I still have days. I had a day last year. I was, and really it was just because I was tired. We'd been riding a lot, and I was tired, and so I just rode with my head down and not as aggressive as I normally am. And when you go try to ride the same terrain, not on point, you get jacked up. So, okay. All right. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of this, and let's break down how to set up and tune your shocks. We've kind of touched base on a little of those, but let's break it down completely. Blaine, I throw you to the wolves quite a bit of like, you hand me the phone, this guy has a question on shocks, I make the deal, and then all of a sudden you're installing shocks, right? So tell the folks at home what to expect. So all right, they finally pull the trigger, they order shocks from us, they show up at the house. What's kind of step one?
Well, and I just think right away to like the number one shock call I get here at the shop is people calling about shock pressures, whether it be they're just checking them for the beginning of the season or they just got their new set of shocks in. They're like, where do I even start? So every air package that we send out, we have a sheet, and it's kind of a spec sheet with the base rider weight and what kind of sled you have, whether it's naturally aspirated or turbo, and kind of gets you some starting numbers to get them set at, to have an idea of where to even start. And I mean, what I found is they're pretty much spot on for my rider weight. I may add 5 pounds here and there in one shock or another, but for the most part, I just set it and check it every now and then. But it's pretty self-explanatory there. One of the big things is to make sure you do the evol chamber first when you put air into it. That's a big, not a big mistake, but it's a mistake that some people will make. They'll do the main chamber first because it's the main one. Let's do that first. But the evol chamber has a higher PSI in it, and it can kind of get things screwed up if you do that in the improper order.
Yeah, and there's a sticker on the shock that literally says fill evol first.
Yep.
And the reason that you're actually filling the evol first is there's an internal floating piston inside the shock that if two things. If the main chamber pressure exceeds the evol chamber, it can actually flip. And so sometimes what can happen is if guys either do that or, maybe they're during the preseason, they're wanting to, just recheck their shocks. One thing that we'll do is we'll just have guys just do a full reset and make sure that, all of the internal stuff is where they need to be. And the way you do that is you bleed down or air down both chambers, both the main and the evol. And then you just start over airing up the evol first and then the main.
And in doing that too, make sure you do that when the sled is unweighted.
Correct.
So I've made that mistake before too, and it does affect it.
Yep. So we'll start over and talk about that. Okay. So you receive your shocks. Is there air in them at first? Yes, there is. So the air shocks come preset with a number kind of in the middle of our pressure sheet, and so kind of set up for that 180 to 220 guy. But we always ask people to check the shocks. prior to installing them, just to make sure everything is good. Fox does they have a protocol check system before the shocks leave and everything there too, but it's always good to double check. And so one really big misconception too is so when you screw the air pump, the provided air pump onto the shock, you get a reading, okay? So you got to remember what happens is that reading, it has to fill up the air hose, okay? And so that first initial reading is going to be a little low. And what happens also is for example, let's just say you need to set the shock up at 60 PSI in the main and 100 PSI in the evil. That's like a very typical setup for like my rider weight. So you screw in the evil chamber and it reads 95, which is pretty typical. So you pump it back up to 100 and then you let the Schrader valve out and you hear this air go psst. And then you're like, oh no, I lost pressure in my shock. And then you screw it back in and you're like, oh, yep, sure. It says 95 or 90. So remember that pressure when you undid the pump, that was not air coming out of the shock. That was the air in the line of the pump. So whatever you pumped your shock up to, let's say it was 100, like the sheet said, and you unscrewed it, that shock is set at 100. But when you screwed it in to check, the reason it set a lower number is because it had to fill that hose on the pump. Okay, so that's kind of that's a big misconception. Guys think that they have to pump more into the shock because when they unscrew the hose, it loses pressure. It's not losing pressure. It's just draining the air out of the line. Okay. All right, that was like long-winded, but something that
you saved me a few phone calls. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome. One little tip here: when we go grab a set of shocks, like our shocks are stored outside. We do that for a couple reasons. A, we don't have room inside, but B, the shocks are stored in the cold, and what happens is there is a slight air pressure variance between a shock at warm temperature and a shock at outside temperature, or especially when we're riding at 0 degrees, for example. So one thing you can do is you could do two things. A, you can leave your shocks outside overnight and then fill them in the morning when they're cold. You can throw them in the fridge, freezer, whatever that way. And or you can adjust just a couple pounds of air if they're at room temperature. And again, it's not like crazy critical, these couple pounds, but it's something. I'm that type of person that I want it to be accurate. And so again, I'm not trying to complicate things, but these little tips and tricks, they're not hard to do. Like, leave the shocks outside, make sure they're cold before you do, and or add a couple pounds in the main and evil versus what the pressure settings say on the sheet. If the shocks are at room temperature, that kind of makes sense, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So once you get your shocks installed, please don't just like, hey, my rear suspension feels really stiff. Oh, okay. Like in the shop? Yeah. Have you ridden your sled? No. Okay. So you got to go ride. You got the back end won't even move. So especially on the air shocks, the new seals take a couple rides to basically break in, and there's you can notice like the sled will actually like take a set, and you got to kind of break the seal those first couple times so the suspension will go through the travel. There's nothing wrong with the shock. They will break in. It's something you will never notice on the snow. So don't let that scare you. Get it out on the snow and it'll be fine. Okay. To Blaine's point, we like to set the pressures of the shock initially before an install. We like to check those on the bench. It's just easier versus crawling around on the sled and or having to tip the sled over, because you do want to adjust the pressures on the shock with weight off of the sled. Okay, and even you shouldn't we very rarely are adjusting air pressures out in the backcountry unless we're just like, trying a new setup or doing this or that. That's the beauty of the air is like, once you set it up to the air pressure sheet, I mean, that's pretty damn close for probably 95% of the people out there. No one wants to be like tipping sleds over and hooking air pumps out when it's cold and you got gloves on and it's snowing. We're never adjusting air pressure on the snow. That's what we have the clickers for. So pay attention to the air pressure setup sheet. Get it tuned with the air pressure. So when you're ready to go, and then all you're doing is utilizing the clickers.
Yeah, and that's another question that we get a lot too. Is like people looking whether to get the coil or the air, and they're worried about the air because they're worried about losing air or having to fumble or fidget with it. And they're not the air shocks of the past.
Correct.
They've come a long way. Because I remember an older set I had on I think it was like a Pro RMK, and there was a front shock that would kind of leak a little bit here and there, but that's long in the past at this point. I've never had an issue with any of these newer style shocks.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And again, when we're fielding calls here with guys asking the question, which shock package is for me, if you're listening to me talk about setting air pressures, and even though I'm saying like, dude, it's very simple. You follow the sheet, you set them once, and you go ride, and you're still saying, I don't trust that. I just don't want to do that. I mean, that's why we have the coil package. The coil package is really geared for that set it and forget it guy. Mm-hmm. We still hope that you guys will use the adjustable QS3 switch. I'm hoping one of the reasons why you're buying shocks. But on a coil shock, you might do a first initial preload adjustment, and then literally you're just riding it. You're not setting air pressures or anything like that. So we definitely saw that customer or that use demand. So that's and I love the coils. I do love the simplicity. But for me, from a performance standpoint and weight standpoint, I do personally prefer the air stuff.
Yeah, I've ran some of the coils on just some of our demo sleds and gotten to ride them, but I've never had one on my own personal sleds. But
yeah.
If you're already there, I prefer the air.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So I hope that helps with kind of the initial setup. Really, it's like get the sheet in the box, look at your rider weight, pressurize the shocks or check the pressure in the shocks, get them installed and go ride them. And then, adjust the soft or firm, or remember what I said, fast or slow of the chassis based on the clickers. And, Blaine asked a good question, where do I normally ride? I hope that helped on the breakdown. And then just remember from the tuning the shock side of things, you have the ability with the air shocks, again, explaining that air is just a spring. So if you picture, as I was talking about, 60 pounds of PSI in the main chamber and 100 PSI in the evil chamber, it's so easy for me to do. So I'll give you a perfect example. On my lightweight sleds, I have to run different pressures than I do on a stock boost sled because of the weight. The weight is so different. I mean, 50 pounds on a sled is significantly different. And for me to be able to do that with air pressure instead of having to change springs is huge. And for you big guys out there, like anybody over 250, like 250 plus with your gear on, I really try to convince those guys to go air, because the air, the way that I was explaining how it's soft initially, but the ramp up really helps with the bottoming resistance. It's so huge for you big guys, and because the sled can become very unpredictable with a 300-pound guy on a stock suspended snowmobile, because it's just so wallowy and like it's just hard to ride. And we can really dial those big guys in with the air package.
What is there like a certain feeling you're going for, or because I know these shock pressures are very generalized. It's you're painting with a broad brush here. It's like Here's where your starting numbers are, so you can adjust from there. So when a rider goes out on a trail and say he's in 1 and he's his back end is bottoming out here and there on a couple of these big bumps or whoops and something, an ungroomed trail. Like, what are you looking for? Do you tell him to go to the 2 setting on it, on the rear shock, or do you tell him to add air? Like, what kind of feeling are you going for?
Good job, Blaine. And it's probably a question someone out there was, thinking that exact same thing. Or I have air shocks, and so what I look for, this is me personally, okay, is on let's talk about the trail coming in, okay? That chatter stuff, I should be able to run on 1 and just like be super comfortable, never have a sketchy moment, and that sled just be a rail down that I call it chatter bumps.
Yeah.
Now, we've ridden Canada, and you get those huge rollers like this, or the Rabbit Ears parking lot. There's those 2-footers or 3-footers, and it's like you should bottom out in 1 on that.
Okay.
100%, right? Like, if I'm not bottoming out on 1 on a big hit and or a big roller, then I'm not using all of my suspension. So I will generally, again, 95% of the time, all I have to do is go to 2, and that will eliminate the bottoming out. I am not a person who wants to get off and add air pressure.
Yeah.
All the guys waiting for me, right? But like, if I know, oh man, the trail's going to be whooped out, it's big bumps today, I'm going to go on 2. But if the groomer just hit it and there's just some small chatter bumps on it, I'm going to go in 1. It's going to be comfortable, right? And so that's how when we do all of the valving and air pressure sheets and all of this stuff, we want the sled in an extreme situation to bottom out on 1. That's because you have adjustment, and it's easy to go up or increase the dampening on the compression.
So on the contrary side of that, say you do switch your rear track shock to 2, and you're going through these bumps and you're not even hauling ass and you're starting to bottom out a little bit, maybe add some air pressure in the main, or?
Yep, that's a really good point. So if you go to 2 and it's still bottoming out, exactly, I would add more air pressure to the evil chamber. So again, remember that evil chamber is your bottoming resistance on that rear track shock.
Because you got tunnel bags and all that stuff. You might be a rider weight of, say, like the sheet goes up to maybe 200 or something, or 210. Say you're at 200, so you're in that air zone, but then you add a 50 pounds of your tunnel bag and all kinds of other stuff on your sled. So you adjust it from there.
Great question. And one other thing too is when we talk about kind of what I look for in a setup of the shocks, and I think one of another big difference over what stock does is, and I'll use the air package again because it's what I like to ride and what I focus on from a setup standpoint is, I like the feel of my sled to have, in both the front and the rear suspension, to have a lot of that initial like softness or plushness. It allows the sled to absorb bumps and logs and rocks and ruts, but it doesn't keep going. What it does is it's soft initially, and then it gets firmer throughout the stroke. And what that does is it allows the sled, instead of continuing trenching, it allows the sled to stop that trenching and lift out of the snow and drive forward. So that's kind of what I look for, is I want the sled to be very nice and easy and plush initially, but I like how it gets stiffer through the stroke.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about kind of the breakdown on how to set up and tune the shocks, setting pressures in the cold. This is, we've kind of touched on this, but I want you guys to understand and know, and I said it already once, but I can't say it enough. Don't be afraid to adjust your shocks, okay? It's easy to do. You'll feel the difference. That's the other thing too, is that I notice with the stock shocks is whether I go full soft or full stiff, it's like, I think I can kind of feel a difference there. When you go from 1 to 3 on our shock package, it's significant. It's a very big difference. And basically what's happening is you're opening the valve or you're closing the valve. So open is soft, closing is stiff, and basically it's oil going through an orifice, okay? And so if the orifice is all the way open, the oil, it goes through the orifice very easy. Vice versa, if you close it, it's harder to get through there, making the suspension stiffer. So just think about me yelling at you to adjust your suspension because of, you know, the conditions that you're riding in and things are changing. And so, you know, you were kind of talking about it, like I ride on the trail on one most of the time, but then when I get out to where we're riding, I'm analyzing, oh, dude, it's deep today. I'm going 3 on my fronts, 1 on the front track shock, and I'm probably going to be in lockout most of the day. So,
yeah, and I'm quite different on that. Like, say a trail ride in when I'm fresh and we're hauling ass in, I'll put it on 2 or even 3 because you want to just get through the bumps. And I like 3 on that stability on the front end with these mountain sleds. Like, you got a narrow front end. So if you have a really soft front end, it's hard to keep that thing on 2 skis. So, and then the contrary, in the end of the day, like I'm usually pretty beat and I just want to like get out quick, but I also I'll be sitting down a little bit here and there. I put everything on 1 and I just want to just float over everything on the way out.
Cruise on the couch. Yep. And I have on here, use the damn lockout. I think you guys have got this.
Have we touched on that yet?
Yes, we've touched on that many times. Just use it and you'll laugh. Like, or you know, here's what's a fun one too. Go do a line that's hard and keep it in 1, and you know, and you might make it. You could, but go put it in lockout and see how much easier it is. Like, it's real. Like, so for sure. So that's like 51 minutes of breaking down shocks again.
I got maybe another 5 minutes to talk about something. What about shock service? Is there like a certain time or mileage to do because in the past, before I worked here, like I would get probably 2, 3, maybe even 4 seasons out of a set of shocks before I would sell it with the sled and upgrade the sled and all the suspension. So can you get away with servicing shocks every 2, 3 years, or do you need to do it every year? Like where are you at there?
Blaine, you earned your keep today. Some very, very good questions. And this is where one of the areas, in my opinion, Fox excels. Is on the service side of things. Scott and his crew in Baxter, Minnesota, they are absolute studs. They really take care of the customer. And so from a service interval side, and this is another big advantage over stock, in my opinion, I think the stock shocks are actually pretty dang good for that first 300 miles. And then after that, you can kind of start feeling the shocks go away a little bit. Our service intervals on our shocks are, we recommend 2,000 miles on mountain miles. So for a lot of you guys, that's the life of your snowmobile, which is awesome. And let's just say you ride a lot. Let's just say you do 2,000 in a year. Good for you. I'm jealous. And the process of sending in the shocks is very straightforward. Fox's website has a snowmobile service form that is filled out that gives you a return authorization number. You slap that on the box, you send your shocks in. And what's really cool is the service is very affordable. And what they do also is, let's just say you bought a shock 2 years ago. We come out with a new valve code that's better. They will update that your shocks to the newest valve code while they're in there servicing the shock, which is just awesome. That was a really good question. Service intervals are about 2,000 miles, which is a ton of mountain miles.
Yeah, I didn't even know they'll update your valving and all that stuff too.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That is cool.
Yep. Okay, last little bit here. This is not a Fox guarantee. This is a me guarantee, but Fox backs me because they believe in the product as much as I do. We have a 100% money back guarantee on all of our Fox shocks. And you guys have heard me talk about that, or maybe you haven't, but they're expensive. And so like when you're spending anywhere between $2,500 and $4,500 on something for your snowmobile, 2 things. A, it better be a gigantic difference and something that you can feel. And B, if I mean, me personally, I want to know that it's going to be worth the money. And I like on this shock side of things, it's really easy for me to put my money where my mouth is. I have yet to have to buy a set of shocks back. However, we have done this a few times where guys were a little apprehensive on what package they wanted to get. And like last year, I had a guy who ended up getting an air package. And he was a bigger dude. We sold him a rear spring. And he was like, man, I like I like them, but I just want a little different feel. And we sold him and so we took those back. We sent him out a set of airs, and he was like, I cannot believe the difference. I should have listened to you first.
Yeah, so we started with a set of coils.
Yeah.
And if you're 250 or more, you end up getting a stiffer rear spring.
Yep. Yeah.
And he sent them back, and we got those airs set up and haven't heard from him since. So it's a good sign.
So money back guarantee. And we also, for you guys who like pick up your new sled or have a slightly used sled, we don't take your clapped out shocks. But if you have a new set of walkers off of your new mountain sled, we've got a trade-in program for that. So we'll buy your shocks from you and get you into some Foxes. So pretty awesome. One thing for those of you guys who spent the last 56 minutes here listening to us blab about shocks, I want to hook you up too. So anyone who listened to this podcast, we'll give you a podcast deal. Just give myself, Blaine, or Ashley a call here at the shop. Say, hey, I think I'm ready. I listened to the podcast and we're ready to buy some shocks. Can I get the podcast 10% off discount? So we'll give you 10% off, and hell, we'll do some free shipping too, which shipping on shocks kind of sucks. So we'll save you some money.
Feeling good this morning.
I am, man. I love talking about sleds and shocks specifically. So 10% off when you mention the BBA podcast, when you call in and talk to either myself, Blaine, or Ashley, and we'll get you fixed up. So hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Blaine, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Really good insight. It's awesome to have you on the team. It's been cool to watch you see the benefits of the shocks itself. You, much like a lot of the guys who come here, it's like, man, I don't know if I can afford it. And then you go ride it and you're like, I'll sell like my left arm so I can have
I'll walk to work for some shocks
because it's that big of a deal.
Yeah. So I'm stoked to be here and looking forward to the season. If we can't ride sleds, we may as well talk about them.
That's right. Cool. Awesome. Enjoy your day and hit us up with any questions you might have.